Hello and welcome to ONTV Fantasy Football League. I'm Joe Johnson, who also happens to be the commissioner, and I'm joined by Ian Witherspoon, who is playing in this newly expanded league this season.
I was here last year.
Yeah, but we newly expanded it this year to 10 teams? We had 8 last year. And we just completed week 11 in the fantasy football season. We were hoping to do a couple more regular updates, but originally we were going to try and do the halfway point, and it snuck up on us pretty quickly. So the NFL season is just past the halfway point. In the world of fantasy football, we're just about 2 weeks out of the playoffs, which is shocking. What is your take on the 2017 fantasy season so far?
You know, going back to last year, I think personally I did a little better. But what's crazy about the NFL this year is all the stars that are hurt.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest story of 2017 are the marquee names that are gone for the season. It doesn't even seem like the same league without an Aaron Rodgers, without an Odell Beckham. Those were catastrophic injuries, and to lose those guys for the season really changed the landscape of the NFL and fantasy football.
Yeah, and you look at Ezekiel Elliott. He took the fantasy world by storm last year, and he's been up and down, and now he's out. And
well, those who took a chance on him on draft day, there was no way of really knowing when and if that suspension was going to be held up. And all season long, they've been fighting it, and it's been going to court and all this stuff. So those who took a chance on draft day, it really paid off for him for the first half of the season.
Yeah, Anthony Terramina, I do recall.
Did he take a chance on him? And it's paid off. But now with the playoffs looming, he loses them for, it's going to be 6 weeks, right?
Yes.
So that hurts. And so hopefully if you have Elliott, you have either his handcuffs stashed on the bench or you have a deep bench that you can fill in that gap. But it's going to hurt people heading into the playoffs.
Yeah, you know, a lot of people tried to remedy that by drafting Alfred Morris or Darren McFadden, but they're not the same talent as Ezekiel Elliott.
I agree.
Yeah.
So let's take a look at the standings in the ONTV Fantasy Football League for 2017 so far.
Do we really have to do that?
You know, you were doing really well for a while, and you and I went head-to-head in Week 11, and I handed you your 3rd loss in a row.
Appreciate you. Yeah.
So you're still doing okay. You are, what's your
3rd.
Your record?
I'm Bell's Army.
Oh, Bell's Army, that's right.
Christopher Arthur Bell.
So you've fallen below 500, I believe, for the first time this season. Yeah. But it's so tight this season. I mean, Joe Velez, Galladay, celebrate. He has the best record in the league at 8-3, and he's almost a shoo-in for the playoffs, I would imagine. But look at the rest of those numbers. There's 4 teams that are 6-5, 3 teams that are 5-6, and there I am, tied at bottom with Kevin McCormick at 4-7. And if I win 2 more games, I might be in the running for the playoffs. That's how tight it is.
Yeah. Yeah, didn't you start off 0-4?
I did,
like that?
And then I won like 3 games in a row, and then I made some terrible mistakes mid-season. I should have a far better record than what you see here.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, it's all to luck. But if you, like, for instance, when we played head-to-head this week, I decided, hey, Derrick Henry's going to have a really good game. Why did I decide that? I have no idea. So I stashed Keenan Allen on the bench and started Derrick Henry. So, you know, it's all about those little moments.
Sometimes you, when I say you, I mean us, we overthink our rosters, our starting lineup sometimes. Sometimes you just got to put your guys that have been paying off for you all season, you got to put them in and let them play. But I sit there and I look at matchups and I tweak and I try to fix things, and sometimes you just kick yourself. One of the major mistakes that I made this season was, what's his name, DeAndre Hopkins from the Texans. You know, he's been a stud for me all season, and then his bye week came, so I was forced to bench him on his bye week. Well, the following week, I forgot to put him back into my starting lineup, and he had a monster game, and that cost me my game that week. So mistakes can kill you too.
Yeah, and you know, you mentioned DeAndre Hopkins. What's surprising about him is he kind of struggled in fantasy in previous years because he didn't have anybody throwing to him.
Yeah.
This year, no matter who's throwing the ball to him, he's performed really well.
Well, you know what? I went after him this season because of his consistency. That last season, and maybe even the season before that, to me it seemed like no matter who was throwing to him, he was consistently giving me double-digit points week after week. And so I've always been a fan of his, and I was happy to get him this season. And he should be one of those guys I just leave in my starting lineup and not touch, but I screwed up because of the bye week.
You get too cute.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like overanalyzing who I was going to put back into my starting lineup and just overlooked him for some strange reason. And then on the plus side, one of the reasons that my team blew up this week is injuries to my starting quarterbacks have killed me. I was hoping to use Jameis Winston all season, and he's really burnt me. We're going to talk more about that a little bit later.
Yeah.
But his injury, he'll come in, he'll play for a quarter and then get knocked out of the game. And in our league, we don't play team quarterback. You play that one guy. And when he gets knocked out of a game, that's it. Your points are done.
Right.
So there were several games where I got like 2 or 3 points from him, and it killed me.
Yeah.
And so
You
dealing
weren't
with
eating a
injuries.
W.
What's that?
You were not eating a W those weeks.
No. And so in desperation, I went to the waiver wire, and even though I'm not a fan of his, the only quarterback that jumped out at me on the waiver wire was Big Ben. And so I picked him up in desperation, and I started him this week, and he blew up. A monster week, 4 touchdowns, and 3 of them were to Antonio Brown. So sometimes you get a little lucky. You make a desperation pickup on the waiver wire, and he becomes a high-scoring guy for you.
So are you not a fan of Big Ben because of his on-field performance or his off-the-field performance?
I've had him in previous years in other fantasy football leagues, and he's disappointed me many times. When I've needed him to come through for me, he'd have a lackluster performance through multiple interceptions, no touchdowns, and I just felt like he wasn't consistent enough on a week-to-week basis to make him my starting quarterback.
Yeah, I don't see him as a guy that is a consistent fantasy starter.
Yeah.
Because of the run game and just his age.
Yeah, and he said it himself, when he had a really bad game earlier this season, the reporters asked him, what happened, and he said, maybe I'm done. Maybe I just don't have it anymore.
Yeah.
And so that's what made me nervous about picking him up on the waiver wire and starting him. I'm like, maybe he is done. And then he has a performance like he had. And I hate to bring this up, but I was at the Lions game when they hosted the Steelers, and he was looking good, and I'm like, I thought he was done. I'm talking to all the Pittsburgh fans that were surrounding me, and I'm like, well, I thought Big Ben was done, and they're like, apparently not. So, yeah.
Why were you at the Steelers game with Steelers fans?
I was at the Lions game, surrounded by Steelers fans. They really showed up in large numbers at Ford Field. It was heartbreaking.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And then
much like that game.
Yeah, and then to lose that game and hear the Steelers fans gloating after the fact, that was one of the worst Detroit sports moments I've ever had. The only sports moment that tops that, as far as the worst, was going to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals when the Red Wings hosted Pittsburgh, of all teams, and lost at home. Do you remember that?
Joseph, that was 2009, and you are banned from all Detroit, Pittsburgh sporting events.
I guess. That was brutal. That was my worst Detroit sports moment because I thought we were going to see confetti fall and see the cup skating around, and it did, but it wasn't the Red Wings. But
no,
we digress.
Yeah.
All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to take a look at kind of a mid-season report card here, and we're going to look at some of the top players in the skill positions and how they've been doing this season. So let's look at quarterbacks first. And if you can see here, they're ranked by points, how we have it set up in the ESPN league here. And moving into first place after 11 weeks of action is Russell Wilson. He had a monster performance on Monday Night Football, and he's moved into the #1 position. Not by much. There's only a few points separating the top 3, but we got Wilson at the top, followed by Brady, who does it year after year after year.
Even more so this year from a fantasy perspective, I think. I don't think he was ranked 2 in previous years.
Yeah.
I think he's been a little more prolific this year.
Yeah, and I think part of that might have to do with New England's defense.
Correct.
That New England's defense has been giving up points, which is
Right.
forcing Brady to put points on the board. Not that he's ever had a problem doing that. But there he is in the top 3 again, proving that he's Hall of Fame bound and quite possibly the greatest of all time. Carson Wentz, has he surprised you to see you in the top 3
Very
position?
much so. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Philly in general, not only do they have a good defense, but their offense is absolutely bludgeoning people.
Yeah.
And Carson's a big reason for that. I mean, he makes plays like a Russell Wilson or an Aaron Rodgers. The play is never dead.
And he's making his wide receivers look like stars.
Right.
Ertz is having a
Zach
career.
Ertz. I mean, he was always a middle of the road tight end. Now we'll see he's in the top 3. It's insane what they're doing in Philly.
He's making everybody around him look better. In the 4th position, Alex Smith with the Chiefs. He's been kind of mostly up, but he really killed me in Week 11. Or you have him in this league in Week 11. He was facing the New York Giants, one of the worst teams in the NFL this season.
Playing for nothing.
He was the NFL.com's. He was NFL.com's lock of the week.
Yeah.
Must start quarterback, Alex Smith, and you start him. And what went wrong? What happened?
I don't know because I didn't watch the whole game, but the highlights that I did see, you got Travis Kelce throwing passes.
Yeah.
Like what?
That's too
For
getting
what,
cute again.
For what reason, off of your bye week against the G-men, who are playing for literally nothing, just lost in San Francisco the week prior, like, why do you decide that's your week to bust out the tight end pass?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if it's I mean, because what are they? They lost, 4 or 5 now, I think the Chiefs have? Something like that?
Yeah.
3 or 4?
Yeah. And if we look at his numbers, let's click on his little window within the window here. He's been very, very consistent. Look at those numbers. Week 1, 42 points. 20, 19, 31, 35, 19, 35, 16, 23. I mean, you can only hope that your quarterback's going to give you that kind of consistent performance during the season. And then all of a sudden, against the lowly Giants, 7 points, no touchdowns.
Yeah.
It's heartbreaking.
It really is, especially when I'm playing you and you drop me below 500 and are
it was a
knocking on the back door.
Week to have that performance is what you're saying.
It was a bad week overall, yeah.
Kirk Cousins in the number 5 position. What's your take on Kirk this year?
You know, overall, Kirk, obviously, from a fantasy perspective, has been doing pretty well. But there's something weird about Washington. They can't, I don't know if they can't get out of their own way. You know, they were up 35 or whatever, 30-something to, I don't even remember what the score was in the Saints game over the weekend. And Drew Brees and the Saints, you know, looks like they're Super Bowl year again.
Yeah.
Where they started off 13-0, all those miracle wins. Well, not miracle wins, but they had a lot of comebacks in there. I don't know. I mean, from our perspective, hey, Kirk's doing just fine, but it is, you know, it's weird. His receivers, tight end, Jordan Reed's never there. I don't know, just not very. I would have a hard time. I have a hard time drafting him, and I would have a hard time starting him from week to week.
Hey, look at these numbers. More often than not, he's putting up 30-plus points. Again, you can't ask for much more from your quarterback. He has one single-digit week. And here come the lowly Giants, and I expect him to do more against the Giants than Alex Smith did. Those are pretty impressive numbers, and 3 touchdowns in Week 11 against the Saints in a losing effort. But
on the road, too.
Let's talk about our boy Stafford. He's been putting up consistent numbers, double-digit performances, whether he wins or loses. His lowest output was 12 points in Week 4 against the Vikings. But they're not huge numbers week after week, but they're double digits every week. And I guess you can call that consistency.
Yeah, he's definitely very consistent because one thing you know with the Lions is they're going to need to throw the ball because their running game just isn't there. So he's always a good safe bet to draft or pick up when you can because you know he's going to be throwing the ball around a little bit.
Yeah, possibly, Mr. Fourth Quarter come from behind. He has to air it out in the second half of games. So,
right.
And I think that's what's going to happen against the Vikings on Thanksgiving.
Oh.
To round out the top 10, we have Drew Brees, Prescott, Cam Newton, who seems to be having fun out there, and Jared Goff. Who could have predicted that Jared Goff was going to be a top 10 quarterback after the way the Rams played last season? They looked like they were one of the worst teams in the NFL, and now all of a sudden they're looking like the greatest show on turf and looking like a playoff contender and could go deep in the playoffs, even though they did have a really rough game against the Vikings.
Yeah.
Vikings made them look bad.
Yeah.
But here's Jared Goff, a top 10 quarterback in 2017.
Yeah, and they had the highest scoring offense, going into the game last Sunday. So, I don't know. It's weird. The way they looked last year from their running game, they couldn't run the ball. Jared Goff could not throw the football. He looked like Blake Bortles out there. He did not look good. And to go from that to the highest scoring offense in the league it goes to show you how good of a coach Jeff Fisher was.
Yeah.
Because they were terrible, and now they fired him. And
the funny thing is last season in all my leagues, I invested heavily in the Rams, thinking they were going to be doing last season what they're doing this season, and that's why I finished last in all my leagues. I invested heavily in the Rams, and it killed me. Let's move on to the running back position. Speaking of the Rams, Todd Gurley absolutely killed me last season. He was my guy last season, and he was just awful. And now all of a sudden he's the number one running back in fantasy football. Go figure. He's, again, double-digit points week after week, with the exception of the game against Seattle in week 5. 18-13 the last couple of weeks, but usually he's giving you 20 to 30 points. He's just been a stud in 2017.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. It's a pretty wild turnaround. Not anything I predicted or saw. I thought him and everything associated with the Rams was broken, but that is not the case at all.
Yeah.
And it'll be interesting to see, as we get towards our last few weeks here. This is where teams kind of separate themselves.
Mm-hmm.
Minnesota, are they for real? Are the Lions for real? Are the Rams for real? This is where we're going to see who's who, I think, these next few weeks, and that's going to really play a big part in our playoffs.
No surprise here, Le'Veon Bell. He's been consistent last few seasons. Again, look at all those double-digit games.
Look at that picture.
This
must
after
have been
week
taken
1.
before he arrived at camp when he was still
could be, yeah. He's just got a
getting
T-shirt
loose.
on there. After week 1 against, shockingly, Cleveland, he has 7 points. I don't remember. He didn't get hurt in that game, did he?
No.
But, again, double digits all the rest of the way. Just look at that consistency. 34 points against a decent Baltimore defense, and he just keeps doing it. And now hosting Green Bay, I expect big numbers from him against Green Bay.
Yeah, he's got a pretty soft schedule going forward, especially in regards to the defenses he'll be facing.
Yeah.
And every year, because of his pass-catching ability, he should be number 1, 2, or 3 pick every year.
Now, in the hunt, pardon the pun, for Rookie of the Year honors, we got Kareem Hunt. He started off really, really hot at the beginning of the season, 43 points in week 1, double digits, but you notice it's dropping as we go from week to week. Is he hitting the rookie wall? What's going on with Hunt, or are people just figuring out the Chiefs?
Yeah, I don't know if it's the Chiefs being too cute because, they're a team that has the talent. Looking at them earlier in the year, I thought this is the best team in football.
I agree.
The way they went into New England week 1 and just murdered them, and then, to follow it up, they could beat you any way they needed to.
Yeah.
And Alex Smith was controlling the game. He wasn't managing it. So I don't know if they need to get back to watch some old tape and say, hey, what are we doing now versus what we were doing when it worked, because this is a guy with explosive talent. You talk about a pass catcher, fast as lightning, can run between the tackles. I think he should have a good close at the end of the year. Andy Reid obviously is a good coach. I think they'll get it together. And their schedule, Buffalo, the Jets, Oakland, there are some pretty darn winnable games in there.
Yeah.
And I would expect him to keep rolling, or at least get back onto that 15 to 20 point performance.
Well, we'll see. Depending on how he closes out the season, he's gunning for #1 draft pick in 2018. So we'll see. We'll see if we can get it going again. Here's a surprise. Kamara. Am I pronouncing that right? Alvin Kamara? Kamara. He wasn't even on my radar on draft day.
Right.
Was he on anybody's radar on draft day?
No, except for I believe the Polish Hammer drafted him. I think, right? Or no.
No, actually, it says owned by McCormick. So I believe he's owned by Kevin McCormick right now. Now, I don't know if he drafted him. I'd have to go back and look at it, but that's whose team he's on right now. So I don't know. I just didn't even see this guy coming, and then he keeps getting stronger and stronger as the weeks go by.
Yeah, and the Saints, they look like the vintage Saints. They look like, he looks like, when they had Darren Sproles and were putting up 60 on teams in the Superdome.
Yeah.
They got the offense rolling, and what helps him out is, the guy 2 spots below him, Mark Ingram. Mm-hmm. Because that opens up.
Think about that. Yeah. 2 backs in the top 10 from the same team?
It's pretty ridiculous. I wish we saw Theo Riddick up here, because I feel like, from a Lions fan's perspective, that's kind of his role, what Kamara is, that pass catcher. I don't know. Rookie, good speed, Saints are rolling.
What makes the Saints that much more scary is the fact that they've always been a passing team with Breeze leading the way, and now they have 2 running backs in the top 10 in fantasy.
Right.
They're going to go deep into the playoffs.
And their defense is good.
Melvin Gordon, drafted him. That's my guy. Love the guy. He's been kind of up and down over the last couple of weeks. Eckler is stealing some opportunities from him, poaching some touchdowns, which irks me. But you look at the middle of the season there, 33 points against the Giants, 35 against Oakland. Then he cooled off a little bit, and Eckler came in and started taking some touches away from him. He looked really good in Week 11 against Buffalo. He scored a touchdown, 80 yards rushing, and so I'm hoping that Eckler has lit a fire under him, and I'm hoping he's going to produce the rest of the way.
Yeah, that's the way it is in the NFL. Perform or you're out.
Yeah, exactly. That's what the Patriots do.
Yeah.
Let's talk about Ezekiel. We touched briefly on Mark Ingram, but let's talk about Ezekiel Elliott. We talked about him earlier. He should have been suspended at the beginning of the season. It just got stretched out over the next several weeks, so he kept playing. He kept producing. Look at that, 40 points in Week 7 against San Francisco.
Poor Niners.
And then what happened against KC? 93 yards and touchdown. That's not bad. It only resulted in 15 points. But then look at those goose eggs suspensions. So so let's see. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. He's gone through Week 15. He comes back to Week 16, which is our championship week in fantasy. Gosh. So he might get him back for the championship game if he makes it that far, but without Elliott the next several weeks, it's going to be tough.
Yeah, that's a huge loss, and it goes back to what we touched on at the beginning of the show, the numerous big losses due to injury and suspension in the NFL. It's crazy.
Yeah. McCoy, I drafted him. I remember, I think I had the 9th pick. Were you sitting to my left? Were you 10th?
I was 10th.
Yeah. So I remember I had my pick, then you had back-to-back picks, and then it came back to me. And with my 2 picks, I got Gordon and McCoy. Mm-hmm. And I've never had McCoy on my fantasy team before, and I just got him because he was the suggested pick at the position that I was at. And he's been pretty consistent. You can see he had a couple of down weeks. Did not expect him to have a down week against the Saints or the Jets, but he did. But then he got back in Week 11 against the Chargers, 114 rushing yards, touchdown. He had a rushing touchdown and I believe a receiving touchdown to produce 25 points. So I've been happy with my two running backs, despite my record. My records have been, or my running backs have been producing for me.
Yeah, and it's good for LaShawn in Buffalo now, getting back to that defense and ground and pound game. That's what they're doing up there. So
definitely. Rounding out the top 10, we have Fournette, another candidate for Rookie of the Year.
Just don't ask
he's
him to take a
been
picture.
now. I have him in another league, and you can see there's been a little bit of a stretch there where he really hurt teams. They took a precaution coming into the bye weeks, and they benched him. He had tweaked his ankle or something like that. So heading into the bye week, they said, "Oh, we're not going to take any chances. We're going to bench him in Week 7 against Indianapolis," which was a killer. Then the bye week comes, and then the owners are like, "All right, he's going to be back against Cincinnati," and then he's a surprise scratch. I think there were fantasy teams that had him in the starting lineup because it was like such a shock that he wasn't going to play, and apparently he had missed some team meetings or something.
Team photo.
That's a killer, man, to not have your number one back not start because of discipline issues. That's a killer. And then the week after that, he only rushed for 33 yards, generated 6 points. So, including the bye week, there's 4 straight weeks where you could not rely on Fournette.
Yeah, that's a huge bummer.
He's got to turn things around. I'm hoping that he's learned and going to come on strong the rest of this season. But despite that stumble there, I still think he's a candidate for Rookie of the Year.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's going to depend on how him and Kareem finish out the year, I think.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to watch. And then closing out the top 10 is Carlos Hyde, which kind of surprises me considering San Francisco's just been god-awful this season. Not really monster numbers, but consistent numbers, 21 in Week 9. Almost 100 yards rushing against the Giants in Week 10. And he's coming off a bye in Week 11. It kind of surprises me to see that name, despite the team he's playing on, finishing the top 10.
Yeah, that's very surprising. And it's kind of been a feast or famine for running backs this year. They're the guys at the top of the order, and then there are guys that you just cannot count on at all.
They've always been the bread and butter of fantasy football. You got to have a good number one and a decent number two to have any chance of advancing to the playoffs in fantasy football.
Yep.
All right, let's move on to wide receivers. Most people agree that the rule changes and things that have been happening in the NFL have made wide receivers more valuable than ever in fantasy football. They're the ones who generate monster points in fantasy. And there he is, season after season after season. Antonio Brown is the number one guy. And I don't know why I pass on him every year. I always think, he can't keep it up. And
this is the year he's going to suck.
Yeah, really.
Happens.
And he just never does. He's so consistent and so good. Look at that game against Tennessee, 144 yards, 3 touchdowns, 42 points. Anyone who had Antonio Brown in their starting lineup was guaranteed to win this week.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you watched that game at all on Thursday Night Football. It was pretty wild. And those rare 3-touchdown games, it's got to feel great for the opposing fantasy manager, just seeing him continue to rack it up and know that one player on that team is going to score half your points. It's fun. But that guy is one to do it.
I've had, in some of my other leagues, there are some guys, and it's kind of a coincidence, in 2 of the leagues, the same team started Roethlisberger and Brown. So imagine, I'm a big fan of the hookup, the wide receiver quarterback hookup. Imagine starting Roethlisberger and Brown in Week 11. That was a guaranteed about 100 points from 2 players because Roethlisberger threw 4 touchdowns, 3 of them to Brown. So that pretty much guaranteed a win for their owners. So.
If only it could be like that for you every week.
Hopkins, we touched on him a little bit earlier. Again, I just keep praising his consistency. One single-digit week, shockingly, against Cleveland. I don't get that. That's another theme.
Cleveland's way better than their record.
Well, but I think
says Jim Caldwell.
Yeah, that's true. One of the themes of this season in the NFL is that just when you're ready to write off a team and say, God, they're just terrible, they get these inexplicable wins and stuff. We were talking about the Giants beating the Chiefs. I don't think anybody saw that coming. And so you look at these numbers, and he's got all these big, consistent numbers. And then you look against Cleveland, he only scored 9 points. It's like that's kind of one of the themes of the NFL's 2017 season is you just can't write anybody off. These players are professionals. They come to play.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's that's why for the first time in, recent memory, you got, the Saints are one of the best teams in the NFC. That hasn't happened in years. Mm-hmm. The Vikings are leading the division with Case Keenum at quarterback.
Yeah.
They're 7-2.
Mm-hmm.
Or 8-2 now? 8-2. It's kind of wild. Oh, you look, Kansas City. That's a team you thought, okay, you got Oakland. They should be pretty good, but they came out of the gates not firing at all. I know Derek Carr was out for a bit, but yeah, it's been weird. I mean, week 1 for the Patriots to lose at home opening the season. I mean, I don't remember ever seeing that happening.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a weird year.
Yeah, definitely. That's Chris Berman used to say, and that's why they play the game. You just never know what that outcome is going to be. Fitzgerald, holy moly. If anyone has clinched a spot in the Hall of Fame, Larry Fitzgerald continues to do it. He had a nice game against Houston, 9 catches, 91 yards for a touchdown. And again, look at those numbers, double digits almost every week.
With who threw to him this week? Blaine Gabbert?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, what?
How did Houston allow that to happen? How did Houston allow Blaine Gabbert to come into their house and have a huge game?
I don't know. It's wild to see, not that Blaine Gabbert's a good quarterback, but Aaron Rodgers goes out in Green Bay, and they look like one of the worst teams in the league. I know they just beat the Bears, but when they played the Lions, when they played the Vikings, when Rodgers got hurt, I mean, they looked terrible.
Yeah. How can their quarterback make such a huge difference?
Look what Deshaun Watson did in Houston. Yeah. I mean, he completely saved their season early on before he went down. I don't get it.
Yeah. Speaking of one guy who makes a difference, Adam
of not
Thielen.
Getting it. Yeah. Gosh darn it.
Get this. I'm in 3 fantasy football leagues, and I drafted Adam Thielen in all 3 of my leagues. And he has been incredible.
Yeah.
Now, I have made mistakes in benching him when I shouldn't have. You notice that 166 one-touchdown, 30-point game. I think I had him on my bench that week. Inexplicably, I don't know why.
Yeah, the week you're not playing me, you bench him, and then you bring him back for me, and yeah.
Yeah, and he had another back-to-back monster games. And again, he's just been fantastic for me. Just a great number 2 receiver to have on your starting lineup, and I've learned just to leave him there and not mess with it. And Vikings are coming to Detroit on Thanksgiving, and I'm predicting big things from my.
Well, wait a minute now. Mm-hmm. You want a little Here's a free piece of advice.
Mm-hmm.
Darius Slay is going to be guarding Adam Thielen probably.
Mm-hmm. I don't think that makes any difference. Adam Thielen is Adam Thielen.
Darius Slay, big play Slay, in his home on Thanksgiving.
We'll see.
You're not coming up into Ford Field and serving mashed potatoes on Darius Slay here. Okay? He's gonna shut him down.
All right, we'll see. Might make a little side bet after the show here. Miami, another team that's been pretty much struggling all season, but Landry is doing his thing. Again, look at the consistency there, double digits all season with the exception of the game against Baltimore. He has scored a touchdown. I didn't even realize this until just now. He scored a touchdown in 6 of the last 7 games.
Wow.
If you can get that kind of consistency from your wide receiver, you just plug him in, leave him in, and not worry about Landry.
Yeah, and who's throwing him the ball?
Cutler right now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, Jay Cutler sucks.
Yeah, I've
So I
never
don't
been
get
a
it.
fan.
I mean,
never
look
been
at,
a
look
fan.
at these. Hopkins, Fitzgerald, Thielen, Landry. These are all guys with backup quarterbacks.
Mm-hmm.
That's pretty impressive. I don't remember that happening before.
Yeah, exactly. A.J. Green, no surprise that he's on the list. I think if I was to express surprise, it's the fact that he's not ranked higher. Andy Dalton has been inconsistent this season, and A.J. Green is a victim when Andy Dalton is inconsistent. He's has a lot of double-digit games, but look at that. Gosh, against Jacksonville, 1 catch for 6 yards.
Yeah.
Against Pittsburgh, 3 catches for 41 yards. But when he's on fire, he's A.J. Green. But Cincinnati's just been so inconsistent this season.
Right, absolutely. And you mentioned that Jacksonville performance. There's another team with
that defense.
Really good
Holy
cornerbacks. Probably the top duo in the league.
One of the biggest surprises I think this season has been that Jacksonville defense.
Yeah,
we'll get to defenses in a second, but
they're putting up a lot.
Michael Thomas, man, we featured 2 of their running backs in the top 10. Here's one of their wide receivers in the top 10. They're firing on all cylinders. They're quarterbacks in the top 10, 2 running backs, wide receiver. It's impressive, and their defense is actually playing fairly well too. Mm-hmm. So, Michael Thomas.
Michael Thomas.
Again, double digits almost every week, and not a lot of touchdowns. I just noticed here he had 2 touchdowns earlier in the season, but he's getting the yardage, he's getting the catches. Look at 7, 8, 9, 6. He's getting the catches, and we made the league a PPR league this season, so that adds points to your total. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure his owners would like to see more touchdowns, but he's giving you double-digit points every week.
Yeah.
One of my favorite players, Doug Baldwin. I'm just a big fan now, and I try to make him part of my roster every season now. Again, just consistency, and he's been fantastic. Double-digit points most of the season, 3 touchdowns over the last 5 weeks. I love the guy. I love Baldwin.
Yeah, he's very exciting to watch. Him and Russell Wilson seem to kind of have something going on with they're on the same wavelength. And what's interesting about Baldwin is, when the Seahawks were really good, winning the Super Bowl or playing for it against the Patriots, they ran the ball a lot more. And now their offensive line is no bueno, and Wilson's got to make plays, and Baldwin is the benefactor of that.
Yeah. Rounding out, Keenan Allen, he just moved into the top 10 after a monster game against Buffalo, 159, 12 catches, 2 touchdowns for 39 points. Let's see, he's owned by Team Witherspoon.
Yeah.
Surely you started him in week 11.
No, certainly did not. Derrick Henry. And his 3 points were on the field instead of Keenan Allen.
Really, though, it's kind of hard to beat yourself up too much when you look at this. He has no touchdowns since week 1. I don't think anyone could have predicted this monster game in week 11, but...
Yeah, I thought Buffalo was going to get back, because they had played pretty well and they got their tails wiped by New Orleans. I thought, hey, they're going to come back and, play in front of 10,000 people in L.A. and have a good game, but not. They got housed again, so...
Yeah. And then Brandon Cooks, speaking of New England, rounds out the top 10. Now, I want to point something out while we're looking at wide receivers. I have the worst record in our league right now. I'm tied for the worst record with McCormick. And my initials here on this list is our HBB. Mm-hmm. So look at this. Number 2 position, Hopkins, HBB. Number 4, Thielen, HBB. Baldwin, HBB. Mm-hmm. I have 3 of the top 10 wide receivers, and I have the tied for the worst record in the league. Go figure.
Defense wins championships, Joseph.
Let's see. We're going to try and wrap things up here. Let's take a quick look at tight ends. Tight end is required start in our league. No surprise, Kelsey's up there at the top, owned by McCormick. He's just consistent. Gronk, of course, as long as that guy remains healthy. I think he missed one game with an injury, but when he's healthy, he produces.
He's automatic.
Zach Ertz, we talked about him earlier, having a monster season. Jimmy Graham finding form since leaving the Saints. He seems to be coming into his own. He had a pretty good game in Week 11.
Yeah, he's been more of a red zone threat, I think, is what's gotten him up here, because he's kind of struggled somewhat since being traded a couple of years ago. So it's nice to see him have a good year.
Yeah, he looked good in Week 11. And then rounding out, let's just stick to the top 5. We have Evan Ingram, who is playing with a terrible, terrible Giants team. I don't even know what's wrong with them this season. They just look awful. But here he is putting up top 5 numbers, and look at these touchdowns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 touchdowns this season. For some reason, he was shut down against Kansas City in Week 11, but top 5 tight end.
Yep. For some reason, Week 11, nobody wanted to perform on old Witherspoon's roster there.
Let's look at defenses. We talked a little bit about Jacksonville's defense. Again, I think this is one of the biggest surprises of the 2017 fantasy season are the numbers that Jacksonville puts up week after week, scoring touchdowns. They did it again in Week 11 against Cleveland. And Cleveland was actually looking at possibly winning that game, and Jacksonville defense scored a touchdown to give them the lead and kept it. Poor Cleveland, but look at that, 24 points. They've scored, this is shocking when you look at this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 special teams or defensive touchdowns from Jacksonville. You just don't see those kind of numbers in a defense. They've been shocking. That's the only word that comes to mind, is they've been shocking.
What's even more shocking is the Lions' defense or special teams has more touchdowns than that.
Let's take a look at the Lions since you mentioned them.
Yeah.
Look at that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 touchdowns. That's impressive. Yeah. I mean, they have a terrible, terrible secondary. I say this every year. Again, going back to that Pittsburgh game when Juju Smith-Schuster took that third down and long pass for, 97 yards or something?
That's correct.
It happens season after season after season. It's secondary.
The surprising thing about the Lions defense is I would say this year their secondary is their strong point.
Really? They give up so many big plays.
The Juju play, not talking about that one. But they have no pass rush anymore, and their linebackers are moderate at best. You got a rookie in the middle as your defensive captain. So there's going to be a lot of growing pains there. But Darius Slay and the Quandre Diggs and Evan Lawson, Glover Quinn, I believe, leads the NFL, or he's up in the lead in interceptions. So they're opportunistic and they get the takeaways.
I just feel like if they can shore up that defense and shore up that secondary, they'd be a playoff contender year after year after year. And I'd like to see their draft go in that direction.
Yeah.
And so we got Jags in first place, Ravens, followed by Lions, Rams, and Eagles. Again, Rams defense is one of those reasons that they're doing as well as they are. So let's round out our skill positions with a quick look at kickers. Prater has been unbelievable, but believe it or not, he's only in fourth place here. But I don't know how many 50-yarders he's kicked this season, but he's had a 50-yarder in almost every game.
Yeah.
I think there's a couple of games where he attempted a 50-yarder and missed.
Right.
But my God, in fantasy football, if you can get a kicker who can consistently put up 50-yarders, that's going to give you double-digit points week after week after week. It's been impressive.
Yeah, and he's as close to a sure thing as you can get. I would, at this point, I'm putting him ahead of Jason Hansen because Jason Hansen wasn't always money from plus 50 like Prater is. And going back to Sunday in Chicago, he couldn't hit one from under 50 in the pregame, but then for 52 to win the game, hey, no problem.
Yeah.
So it's pretty wild.
Yeah. And then Zerline with the Rams, he's just so far ahead of everybody else.
Yeah.
He's 131 points at the top there. So the Rams are just excelling in every position, and it's going to be interesting to see what they do in the playoffs.
Well, they got to get there first now.
We'll see.
There's some interesting games coming down the stretch, and you talk about parity in the NFL. It's going to be very interesting.
I agree. But in fantasy, we're looking at the next several weeks. And what's your prediction here? Velez with Galladay celebrate 8-3 record. What are you thinking? Who's going to advance? Who's going to be left behind?
Yeah, I think Velez is obviously clearing away the top team. I think he's got the deepest team.
Let's look at his roster here.
That's great.
So he's got Breeze at quarterback, Fournette, Mixon, who's been kind of quiet, Antonio Brown, there's one of the reasons, A.J. Green, Safarius Jenkins is his tight end. So, yeah, he has some a lot of top 10 players there.
Yeah, he's got some guys that put up big points. I don't know. It's always fun going into the playoffs because, going back to last year, the championship game is a 2-week deal.
Yeah, but we changed that this season, so it's going to be a 1-week game.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if you noticed, but just recently the schedule was adjusted a little bit.
Right, that's right.
So playoffs are now going to be 14, 15, 16. Last year was kind of an anomaly that I didn't even realize that 2-game playoffs was a thing.
Yeah.
So we changed that this season. So it's going to be 1 win, and if you lose, you're out. If you win, you advance. So.
And there's 2 more weeks of
2 more regular season, and then 3 weeks of playoffs with that 3rd week being the championship
top 4
game.
each division?
I believe so. I think the top 4 teams advance, I believe. So, yeah, it's going to be interesting. Like I said, you look at the records here. 4 teams are 6-5.
Yeah.
Basically, like I said, I think the Velez team is a shoo-in, but the worst teams are only 2 games back from the second place team. So,
right.
Win out, you have a chance at making the playoffs. It's anyone's game. I've never seen, and that's not just this league. I think it's the other leagues that I'm in.
Yeah.
Everything's tight.
Yeah.
There's. I think in one league that I'm in, there's like 6 or 7 teams that are 7-4 or something like that. I mean, it's in all the leagues. It's really, really tight.
I couldn't imagine trying to play those DraftKings or betting on games this year because it is so you don't know.
Yeah.
You just have no idea, and no one can make sense of any of it, I don't think.
Yeah, I always crack up. I watch the Red Zone channel on Saturday or on Sunday with Scott Hansen, and I love when there's that, and then like some no-name player scores a touchdown, and Scott Hansen's like, for those of you who had, somebody who was there's a tight end that scored the other day, and it's like nobody has them, nobody started them, and these are the guys scoring touchdowns, and that's the way this season has been. So.
Yep. Expect the unexpected.
All right. So we'll be back with toward the end of the season with a little wrap-up on the season once we see how the playoffs shake down, and we'll be handing the trophy to...
I think there's something else in there.
What's that?
The loser?
Oh, yeah. We have a bet that whoever comes in dead last has to sing a karaoke song on our karaoke show. The song is going to be of the choosing of his opponents. So, little bet going on there. We'll see if whoever comes in dead last follows through.
They're going to follow through.
I'm no stranger to karaoke, but I don't want to come in dead last. So
we don't want you to.
Really hoping to get a couple of wins to keep that from happening.
I'd like to know what. There are a couple guys in this league. I'd like to know what their singing voice sounds like. So I hope we get to see that.
All right. Well, that'll wrap up this special edition of ONTV Fantasy Football League. We'll see you at the end of the season and congratulate the winner. Ian,
Joseph,
pleasure as always.
Absolutely.
Good luck
Appreciate
the
it.
rest of the way. And we'll see you at the end of the season. Thanks for watching. Good night.